Okay, we're going to do a little bit of fuselage covering now. So, the video is pretty good that Mitch and them did, so that's good to follow along with. I thought I would just kind of go through and make some comments as usual. Um, before I did it, I went through and I put a good amount of polytack along the V bar here on the bottom where the belly pan is going to go. This is going to get cut out later, but what we're going to do is put some polytack down here first and let it dry before we cover. After we put the belly fabric on and get it wrapped around, which I've just finished doing the wraparound on the sides, and then I'm getting ready to do a 250 degree shrink, which is the first shrink. And after I do that shrink, then I'll activate this with MEK and let it hold this good enough to where I can then come back and we're going to end up cutting this over here, cutting it out, and then doing a wrap around these bars, because this will be completely open. This is underneath the seat right here, so we can access all of our stuff underneath here, our autopilots, all of our solenoids and things like that from the bottom, which is easier than coming up from the seat side. So in any case, of course, we got the polytack, and I'll talk a little bit briefly. I talk about it a lot in the forum, but I'll talk just a little bit about using polytack. And the biggest problem I always see as cup crafters does is that they put way too much glue on it, I think. So, I'll show you, I don't use much glue. And I like using a bigger cup. There's some little specimen cups I've used before, and it seems like the polytack will stay a lot better if you put a lot in here. So don't just put a little bit in here. And that was the problem with the little specimen cups that you could throw away, is that it seems like when you only use a small amount, it really dries out fast. But if you go ahead and put a good bit in here when you're going to work, it seems to last a lot better. Also, you can take a rag, and when you're not working, you'll just sort of kind of cover it up to keep the evaporation out. Like I've said before too, MEK is the main thing that's in everything through the polyfiber, the Stitz system. MEK is inside the polytack, and that's why it evaporates out and dries so quickly. It's a glue, so when you put it down, the MEK dries out of it quickly. When you go to put the poly brush in, poly brush is MEK based, so when you put poly brush down, and literally in seconds it's dry, and poly spray in seconds it's dry. But what happens is, as I've said before, is every one of them melts into the previous layer. So because it's an MEK based product, just like here where you can put the polytack down here and then put the fabric over later, come take some MEK and just wet it real good, and it activates, basically melts the polytack again and lets it become works again. So that's the MEK is the secret to it all. So when you end up with a layer of MEK, a layer of polytack here, glue, then later when we put poly brush on here, or we put another layer of polytack on here, like after a while we're going to put the main fuselage blanket on, which will come from this side, and it's going to wrap over the top, and it'll be it'll be polytacked again. When I put one polytack over another polytack, that MEK in it goes down and melts the MEK, the polytack below it, and what it does, it ends up making one bond, so that it's really like one layer. Then you put poly brush on, it goes down into the polytack and grabs it and becomes one. Then the next layer of poly brush does the same thing, and then the polytack, then the poly spray goes on there. It's MEK based, so it goes in and grabs it. So if you peel it off, you'll look at it, it's like one layer. So, and that's kind of what's cool about all this when you understand MEK. So it evaporates quickly, of course, MEK. So use a bigger quantity, you'll find that it lasts longer. I also use, of course, the latex gloves, and I just buy these little chip brushes. They're not, I don't know what they are, maybe $6 or $8 or $10 for a whole box of these. You use them one time and throw them away, no cleaning, just use them and throw them away. Also, if you leave it, if you finish using the polytack like I just did, leave the brush sitting down there in a puddle of it. I actually had it leaned up against this to get it to go down on this side. When it hardens tomorrow, I can take this brush and pull it out, and this whole all this leftover polytack will be like a piece of plastic, and it'll come out and it'll pull completely off the sides and everything, and the cup is cleaner than it was ever cleaned before. So just leave it in there, let it set overnight, pull the brush out, and the plastic will come with it, throw it in the trash, and move on. So that's the polytack. I'll tell you, you'll see in the video that, like I said, it seems like they love to use the glue. And it's really the worst thing you're gonna find on the finish is a lot of glue. As you rub your hand across this thing later, you know, I go across with when I'm done with it, I go across with a wet rag with a little MEK in it, and then I rub down through the edge where it's gonna be showing and make sure it's smooth. Just use that to smooth out the edges. Whenever you use the polytack, for example, this was the belly piece. So this is the first piece that we start. And I'm just rolling it out. There's a center line crease. They make that crease in the center, and it goes down, and you'll feel here's the center bar, you know, the center stringer that we put in, that carbon fiber stringer that went down through here. So you're going to try to keep this center line crease on the center to keep it straight. What I did was took a couple of clamps, and spring clamps. I just came up here, I put about 2 on it, came up here somewhere. I just kind of pinched the fabric a little bit right where that crease is there so it would hold it. I went up to this end and I did the same thing. I just put a little clamp right up here and held it so it kind of helped it on the center. Then I came back and I started at the end, and you're just going to take it and run it all the way down to the back of the fuselage here. And then you're not going to worry about getting anything tight or whatever. Here you just want to work your way down, and of course the fabric at that point is long, it's hanging over. When you put the poly brush on a tube, remember, only put it where it's going to be used. In other words, you see here when this fabric comes over, it's going to wrap around this tube. So only on the very, you know, where it's touching here, only just the top and the side here is going to use the polytack right now on the first one. Don't gob that stuff all over the place. If you gob it on here and you push the fabric down in there, then you're gonna have these gobs. And when you get through doing it, you'll see these little, where it'll actually pull down and hold the fabric like this, and you'll have little lines of glue that are trying to grab the fabric. And when I first started doing it, I'd go back with MEK and just have to melt or the iron and melt it until it came loose and let the fabric pop up to where it wanted to be so it looked nice and smooth across, or not having all these little divots going in where it was the glue had grabbed it and held it down. So you're going to take your brush, you're just going to hold it a little sideways right here and just put some glue along this the top edge. And I just kind of hold it at an angle on the side, you know, like this, at like a 45. I put it and I go maybe 2 feet, depending on how hot it is, how fast it's going to set up. Then I make sure I make one last run with that brush while it's real wet across that top and smooth it out, and across there to smooth it out. Then you're going to take the fabric and you're just going to push it over into it. And the first time you just want to, all you're doing, you're not worried about getting it tight or anything, just bring it across, keeping this centered as you go along. So just come along this side and pull it down. And what I do a lot with my gloved hands is, when I pull it down, then I like to rub it, because again, you want to do, the best thing you can do with polytack is to put it underneath it on the metal, pull the fabric into it, and you'll see the glue kind of come up through the fabric. So it's anchored to the metal, it's coming up through the fabric and all the little holes, little pores, and it's grabbing it. So that's what you want. Okay, and then you can smooth it so you don't have that glue sitting up there leaving an ugly rough surface. So rub it down like that, and then just rub it. Don't try to, as you're putting fabric on, don't try to pull it so tight, because what you'll do is when you start trying to pull it tight, you'll start getting wrinkles on the edges, and you don't want to do that. You can iron them out, but it's a pain. So just kind of get it up there and then work it with your hand, you know, on the back side. Remember what's going to happen here. Remember what you're doing. This is the part you're going to see. You're going to see from here to this side. That's all you're going to see, because now the fabric's going to go from here in a straight line down to this tube, you know, and going on down. So you're not going to see the back side of this tube, okay? We're going to come back later after we go all the way down here and glue the fabric along this edge, just this edge. So don't worry about getting up underneath it now. Just get this edge tacked down. go all the way up, come back down the other side, and then we're just going to take a, here's my compass. We're going to take a compass and set it at 1 inch, and we're just going to set the compass, you know, on top of the bar, just let it ride along the bar, and then your fabric is down below it, you're holding your fabric, and then just mark, go on and mark 1 inch, come back, cut the fabric off. You can see, you don't even have to be pretty because you're never going to see that again. You're going to wrap that edge around the back side, okay? Later, when we put the top fabric on, it's going to come around. And the reason we're doing this, you see, is this is the bottom of the airplane. This piece is going to come around here, and it's going to be hidden. You'll never see it because the next fabric's coming up, and it's going to come around the side of the stringers. And it's going to go from here straight up to here. So anything below this side piece here, around here, you're not going to ever see. And it's going to come up here. And then we're going to come over 1 inch. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to come over 1 inch over here and mark that fabric that's left over and cut it. And then we're going to glue it to the bottom. Now, obviously, you're going to see this, okay? And we're going to have a tape over it later, but you'll still see that cut line. So this is a cut, and even though it's on the bottom of the airplane, who's going to ever see it unless you're crawling underneath there, but you will. So here I really try to take my time and make a real pretty nice straight cut with my scissors all the way down for these cuts, okay, that are here. We're always, well, I'll talk about that in a second. So that's so when you come back and after you cut this off, then you're just gonna come back and take a little section at a time. You take your hand underneath the fabric and you take your brush and you brush the fabric, not the tube. You brush the fabric where it's cut. So you're only getting glue on the fabric and not a lot of it, you know, just get it covered. And then push it around. I just take it with my hand, I push it around, I wrap it around with my fingers. You can see here, I just wrap it around with my fingers. And I'm really wanting to pay attention to the part I'm gonna see. I'm gonna try to keep any wrinkles out of this area here. I don't really care what happens back here. I just want a nice glue line to hold it hard, which doesn't take much for this little bit of fabric. But I know I'm gonna see this, okay, because this is going to be exposed and the next fabric's coming over the top of it and coming over. So I want all this to really look nice. So I try to, right now, do the best I can keeping this smooth, without wrinkles, because you're still going to come back with your hobby iron later and make sure you get any wrinkles, anything that's going to show up, out of here. So as we come along, when it's coming across here, you've cut your 1 inch line all the way down through here. I come back and I take my scissors and I'll cut at each one of these little tubes. You'll cut a little 45 back up into the corner, 45 up into the corner, that way so it can wrap around. It doesn't hit this tube, you need to let it go around. It doesn't matter, you're not going to see any of this, okay? None of this is going to be seen. This is out of sight. The other fabric's coming from this stringer up across the top of here. You'll never see this. Just let it get you a good glue line across here. You can see here, and there's a couple little bubbles right in here. See, and I'll work these out with the iron real good before I put the next layer on, so that I've got this ironed out. And that's no problem. It'll come out real easy with that hobby iron on about 250 to 300 degrees. But you want the pretty areas pretty. But the hardest part is if you get a bunch of glue all gobbed over here, that's a mess, okay? So I could care less what this looks like here. You see, actually it's kind of hard and it's not hard, but it doesn't matter. I want it nice and smooth without wrinkles. Another thing you see them do, I just explained to you how you want the glue to work. You want the glue to come in from the bottom. As you push the fabric into it, the glue is going to squirt up through the holes, which gives it a good grip. Then you can smooth it down if you want to. You'll see in the videos at Cub Crafters where then they like to come back and gob a bunch back with the brush back on top of it. You're like, that's polyfiber says not to do that. And the reason is because you see this stuff dries pretty much as fast as you can put it on and then put it down there. I mean, I'm probably 80 degrees in here right now, and it's literally, I can go about 2 feet with glue as fast as I can put it on there and push it back down and work it in and get it around the corner, and it's tight. It's already that hard. So if you come back and you put glue on top, then what you're doing is stopping any glue from the bottom from coming up, okay? So that doesn't work. And that you'll see a lot of times if you'll have a white area that's kind of white like this, where it maybe is shown where the glue didn't come all the way through, because what you're seeing here is when the glue has come all the way through the fabric. Now this is still, you can see it's not moving, it's still glued down. but it's just not so much that it came through the top of the fabric. But if I were to go right now and put glue over the top of this and try to rub it in, it probably wouldn't go dark, because what's happening, this glue is already up through here. It's already sealed the pores of the fabric and made it hard. So putting glue on top really doesn't do anything, okay? It's just sitting on the top. All you're doing is adding weight to the airplane and a mess to clean up. So polyfiber says not to do that, to put the glue on the bottom and work it up through the bottom. So pushing it and rubbing it with your hand smooths it out, pushes it through the fabric, so that you're getting a good glue joint that way. Okay, so that's the only thing I can really argue with the factory on, is the way they use that glue. It's just way too much. You'll see as you come up along here, this is the extended baggage area. There should be enough room underneath here where you can go back and you can, make sure you're pushing it up there. When you get up to where the floorboard is, here's the floorboard. You can just kind of pull it down with your hands, see? You can just take your brush and you just brush the fabric on back up underneath the edge of the floorboard. It'll be just barely up underneath that edge. When you come up in here, the factory shows doing this and covering this whole thing and everything with this. I don't, because this is all got to come back off. And I don't know if they've changed something, but when you go to mount the wing struts on, it goes over this, the end pieces go over this, and there's no tolerance. You can't have any buildup of fabric or glue or paint or anything. I literally have to come back and cut this off on both sides, and I actually have to even grind. I have to take a Dremel tool with a sander and sand all the powder coat off and get down to metal and even a little more, because when you go to try to you got your wings hung and you're trying to hang them, and you got two guys out on either end holding the wings on, and you're trying to get that struck fork up in there, and it will not fit. I'm just telling you. And you can't bend it, you can't do anything. So that's a waste of time. I put this on here now because when I stretch it, when I shrink it with the irons, I want it to hold. And then later, this is going to get cut off about right here, because all this forward where these holes are and that strut's going to attach, it's going to have to be cut off later. You'll find. Okay. Same thing as you come up here. When you get to this part, obviously you can't tuck it. So you're just going to cut it, the same thing. Let's leave that inch, leave it coming across over here. This part here, you're just going to glue it solid to here, solid to the front, and just take your razor and cut that off. There's no pressure here at all. There's nothing even holding this. It's just really to give it a texture that'll be the same, because this is cutting out. This is going to be metal boot cowl sitting over the top of it, and it's all going in here. You're never even going to see this. So it doesn't matter. You're just kind of getting rid of the fabric right here, and you'll never see it. So you'll see as we go back over to this side, this will be an area. This is where the low fuel drain is going to be over here. You can see this is baggy, a little baggy over here. No worries. I'm going to come back and we're going to shrink. Anytime you're working on any fabric anywhere and you've got stuff that you're going to have cutouts, like on your wing, you've got some cutouts, and I believe this will be the only thing on the fuselage we'll have to cut out. But you'll want to first do a 250-degree shrink. After you do that, that's just to kind of get the fabric moved into the correct position, and then you can come in here, we'll cut this out, and let the fabric drop down. And then once it drops, then we'll come back and then we can do the 350-degree shrink and get it tight. Same thing here with the handles. You can see here, don't worry, see that right there? That will shrink out easily with the iron. I mean, it'll shrink with the iron, and that'll come right out. It's a pain, but it seems like you always kind of end up with that somewhere around here. When you come back to the second side, the first side is glued on. So now the second side, so the first side we glued it, keeping in mind, trying to keep it where this was, decent tight, not real tight. We just wanted to make sure it was, when we pulled it tight, that this line was going to go up the center. Then when we come back to this side, we're going to try to kind of pull it tight. So over here, you can do the same thing. We're going to put the glue on here, then we can grab the edge of the fabric and kind of pull it tight, and just keep kind of working it as you see in the video, where you just kind of go like that and keep working it down and kind of pulling it tight. But you can see it's not real tight. I think with fabric, what happens is when you iron it, the fabric at 250 degrees is going to shrink to a certain tension. In other words, it's not just going to, like 250 is going to take it and just make it go to not shrink. If you got it real tight, really tight, if you just worked your butt off and you really got this tight across here, I mean, you just pulled and worked. First of all, that's going to be a pain because it's going to leave you wrinkles everywhere. When you try to pull it tight everywhere and you're pulling in different directions, it's tighter here, tighter, you'll end up with tons of little nasty little areas across here that you'll have to spend hours getting out with the iron, okay? Little wrinkles, that little wrinkle right there. You know, you'll see tons of those, but you'll get rid of those if you'll quit trying to get it so tight. Don't worry. What I'm saying is that if you had it real tight and you ironed it, it's going to go to a certain tension, and not distance, okay? So if you've got a tight fabric and you shrink it at 250, it's not as much to shrink, and it doesn't shrink it as much. It pulls it so tight, like to a tension, and it stops. You can leave the iron sit on it, doesn't matter, it's stopping. At 350, it does the same thing. So if you got a big baggy area like this, I mean, this will actually come out on 250 easy, but at 350, boy, this place gets tight. And when it gets tight, it's not going to get less tight here than it is here. It's going to go to pretty much the same tension all the way down through here. So don't worry about it. Just kind of pull it tight, get it, you know, as best as you can. You can kind of see how tight this is. I just kind of put some pressure on it, making sure I wasn't trying to pull stuff out of shape, because I pull the fabric here, it pulls it from this direction and leaves all these little nasty things. So you can see as you go down through here, I have very few spots at all. There's a little wrinkle right there, but most of the time you'll see down through here, there's very few spots. They don't have wrinkles in them because I already know how much work that's gonna be. So you see how baggy it is here. Don't worry about it, 250, gonna get it in the right spot. That way it kind of puts the fabric where it's gonna go. That way we know when we burn this hole right here around this thing and drop it down in there, then it's gonna be baggy again. And then we're gonna do then after we're done, we're gonna do the 350 shrink all the way across here, and it's gonna get tight as a drum. Same thing here, we're gonna shrink it to 250. That lets the fabric get to where it wants to be pretty much, then activate it, then cut this, then wrap it around there, the same thing. We're gonna have an inch down here, so we're wrapping around these tubes and gluing it all the way. That way it's gonna give it a lot of good firm support. So then when we come back here, at 350, it'll hold it. And this is what we're doing here. This is just a 5-pound bag of diving weight that I put in there. It's nice. It's gonna, if you don't do this, then it might not touch real well here. So I'm taking the slack out and I'm pushing the fabric down so it's getting a good joint over the top of this, so it's still good when I activate the polytack. So anyhow, that's number one, and I'll come back and do it a little bit later when we do the main part.